morning, everyone. Welcome, or good afternoon, or good evening, as the case may be. We're just letting folks arrive in the virtual door here for our great presentation today. So welcome, welcome, welcome from all parts of the world. We'll let people get settled and then we'll launch our program for today. So people are coming in the virtual door, and I am going to once again say good morning, good afternoon, good day to all of you, recovery peers and recovery allies from around the world. Welcome to the Global Recovery Network's September 2024 Interactive Global Recovery Dialogue. I am Nancy Dudley. I am a consultant to the Colombo Plan and a member of the U.S. State Department's Global Recovery Working Group. And today, our event is the first since our official launch in June at the Art of Healing Global Conference in Greece. And big news, our membership in the network is growing steadily, and we're now nearing the 1,000 member benchmark. So we're glad that you are all here today and spread the word. For those of you who may be new to the network, we're a new global entity, and we are inclusive of people who are persons in recovery and also those who identify as allies and promote recovery in their communities. GRN, which is the abbreviation, is a global platform that's supported by a consortium of international organizations, such as the OAS and the UN. And our mission is to promote a universal understanding of recovery and the diversity and multitude of ways in which it can be successfully practiced. And you can learn more about us on the GRN website, so please do visit us there. So as people arrive, let me begin today's program by allowing me to introduce Michael Botticelli, our facilitator for today's event. And Michael is not only the chair of the Global Recovery Network, but also brings a wealth of experience from his service as the former director of the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy under President Barack Obama. So, Michael, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Nancy, and good morning, everybody. First of all, I just want to start off by also adding to my biography that none of that would be possible if I were not a person in long-term recovery, celebrating over 35 years of sobriety, and it's really wonderful. Thank you. And to Nancy's point about this is our first event after our official launch, I couldn't think of a both better time and better topic to think about our inaugural event. As just about all of you know, this is International Recovery Month. And Recovery Month was really started as a way to increase the visibility of people in recovery and to show others that recovery is possible. I know on a personal level, one of the biggest obstacles for me to get help was that I didn't see a life on the other side of not drinking and not using drugs. And so the importance of creating a visible recovery community is really important. And one of the simplest yet most powerful ways that we can do that is by sharing our story. Nothing changes people's minds than an emotional story. And I often say that throughout the course of my recovery, I have probably heard tens of thousands of stories of recovery. And it's very hard for me to think of an instance where I haven't failed to be moved by someone's story of recovery. With that, though, there are special skills and knowledge about sharing your story that requires a good understanding in terms of the ways to tell your story in the most effective way possible, which is really the topic for today's discussion. Both hearing someone's powerful story, but also thinking about ways that you can maximize the potential for effective storytelling. So we're really thrilled today to have Chris Cull with us today, who will both share his story and give some tips and some skills in terms of ways that you and your colleagues can tell the story. You will hear more about his story, but just as a brief introduction, Chris is a two-time cross-Canada cyclist. He's a filmmaker, he's a motivational speaker, and he's a founder of Inspire by Example. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris now for his presentation and his story. So welcome, Chris, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute honor to be here. I mean, when I started out, when I was on the bus to the methadone clinic, to be here with you, all of you, I mean, that was out of the realm of possibility. So I appreciate the invitation. Just gonna share my screen here. So yeah, we'll go from here. Okay, so yeah, my name's Chris Cull. Yeah, I was just what I'd like to do today is I'd like to share my own journey through mental health and addiction and tell my own story. I've been doing this for advocacy work for approximately 10 years, just past my 10 years in recovery myself. But there was a lot of lessons that I've learned along the way since I didn't really have any guidance for it, and I'm hoping to share some of that lesson, well, some of those lessons for you today. But first, I'll just kind of go through my story to understand how we got here, and at the end, if there's any questions you might have, please feel free to ask. Ask me anything. There's no such thing as an offside question for me because I'm of the opinion that if there's if I'm not being entirely honest about what this experience was for me, I'm doing a disservice to everybody listening. So I'll just get right into it. So my journey began with my dad. He was my hero. He was a paramedic for 27 years, and in my late teens, he was diagnosed with Huntington's disease. He ended up losing his job, his license, his will to live, and began to start cope with that by drinking very heavily, to the point where when I was around 20 years old, he started trying to take his own life on a fairly consistent basis. And I was coming home every day, not knowing if it was going to be the worst day of my life. One day when I came home from school, he wasn't there, and then called around to figure out where he might be. And I ended up finding him deceased in a hotel room after searching around, and that destroyed me as a human being. I didn't know what to do or how to handle that, and I wasn't maturely nor emotionally developed enough to manage that loss in anything resembling productive. But so I started using opioids shortly before his passing to kind of cope with the heightened level of stress. It was just riding a knife's edge of stress for many years, and then after he passed away, I went full out. I just stopped caring about anything, and ended up becoming addicted and physically dependent to opioids. And there was a lot of consequences to that. My father left me in a fairly good financial position after he passed away, and I ended up losing his home that he left me. Ended up spending six figures on pills. Lost a girlfriend of 3.5 years who I loved dearly at the time, who I thought I was going to marry and all that. And lost over 50 pounds, and I was just wrote off and labeled as a junkie by my friends and family, which was a very painful thing to experience. But along the way, I remember after losing everything, I am like, I have to do something here to turn this around. There's some, and I can't keep going like this. So I wasn't even aware of any addiction treatment services or anything like that. The only thing I knew of at the time was a methadone program, and I only knew that from the people I used with. So that's where I went, and I initiated on that program. But with the nature of addiction, if you're not kind of tackling the underlying components of it, it's easy to switch out one for the other. And I started using cocaine for the first 2 years fairly regularly during my time in that program. And by chance, I was assigned a different doctor, and she genuinely showed me that she cared about my well-being, which then built a rapport and trust for me to listen to her and actually have her guidance, and we were able to work as a team. And but I mean, the latter 2 years of my 5 years on methadone was I had no heat or hot water because my gas was shut off. So I was heating a water on my stove to clean myself and curtaining. I mean, Canadian winters are pretty cold, and curtaining off a living room and using electric heaters to keep me and my little dog warm. Who, I don't know if you can see him on the right hand side there, but he's that dog. I wouldn't be alive if it weren't for him. He was my meaning to get me through those tough times. But I went down to 139 pounds, stealing my food to eat. And one day, working as my job as a cashier, it's a very long story, but a guy frisbeed this sign into my face and cut my nose open over this price of difference of 50 cents on 3 apples. And I completely lost it, and ended up quitting my job that day. And then I went home sitting in silence, and I'm like, what am I going to do here? Like, I was just tired. I was tired of stealing my food to eat. I was tired of heating water on a stove to clean myself. But I'm more important, was tired of staring at a clock all day, wishing I was doing anything other than what I was doing. So for whatever reason, I ended up breaking out a notepad and created my own system to figure out what that path might look like for me if I could do anything in the world. And I wrote down these 4 boxes with my passions, interests, hobbies, and stuff I knew I hated to know what to cancel out. That resulted in the idea to ride a bike across Canada and produce and direct a documentary on the opioid crisis, which I had a profound impact on my life over a 8 year period. And but the issue was I had no experience in film, journalism, public speaking, public relations. I hadn't rode a bike in 8 years. I was on the highest dose you could be on of methadone before seeing a specialist. And I didn't know where my next meal was coming from when I had this grand idea. But one of the it started out that found out that like it was the only time I was kind of happy was when I was thinking about this and daydreaming of what that might look like. And so I was telling my idea to a colleague of mine, and her friend was finishing up film school, and she offered to introduce me to him, and we did. And he said, let's do it. I didn't have computer or internet, so I would take the bus to the local library, use their internet and computer, and I took out every single book I could find on everything I wanted to do. And then I went into my doctor's office and said, "Hey, I want to start coming down off methadone." And that was its own journey. It took me about a year and a half to from going from 120 milligrams down to half a milligram, and then hopping off. But I ended up selling my place and started eating regularly again, which was like the greatest day of my life. I felt like a kid in a candy store when that happened, and began training for my first ride across Canada. And that picture on the right hand side there, that was my very first training session. I was still on methadone at that point, and I was 140 pounds. And it was a meat grinder to get in shape up to do in the ride. But yeah, I began training, and then ended up making the leap off of opioids. Now, the decision to come to the point of becoming an advocate, and it was a very personal thing for me, as much as it is for all of you. And same with recovery, for that matter. It's a very personal thing that you go through, and the way I like to put it, it's just like by the time you've reached a point where you're entering into recovery, like your life is almost a blank slate, because it's like a canvas. And then now where you move forward is where you factor in your interests and all the stuff that's important to you, and then you land in a place where you're painting this picture of what it looks like. And I'm no different from that. I came across a book that really changed how I thought about things, and it's one of the biggest impacts of my life, much less my turnaround. So, it's about a Man's Search for Meaning is a book written by a psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist who was put into the concentration camps during World War II, and used his time in there as a case study in human behavior. And one of the points he makes was that, and to Michael's point about couldn't not seeing the like what comes after all this, he made a point in the book that like the people who did make it through were the people who had something to grab onto, and something that they could, that whether that's the thought of seeing a loved one after it was all over, or completing something that they had always needed to, that always was always there. And those was the common denominator of many of the people who made it through. But another lesson was, you get to choose what your attitude is going to be towards any given set of circumstances, and no one can take that away from you. So I applied those lessons, and I also realizing I had a unique knowledge base. I mean, this was in 2013, so this was years ago now. So, but I understood. I saw the opioid crisis only getting worse, and I realized I had a unique knowledge base that you can't go to school for, that I could use to help people. And within all that, back to the kind of your canvas is like I used my interest and to shape what my advocacy looked like. I'd always had an interest in film. I had no experience with it. I was an athlete I before I fell into everything, and but I also wanted to travel again. And so I'm like, okay, well, how do I turn all those things into something that I could use to help others? And the ride in the film was just kind of what it came to that. But it gave me the most important thing was it gave me meaning and purpose in life and what I was experiencing. And to the book Man's Search for Meaning, I mean it's the kind of philosophy of the book is about me finding meaning in your suffering. So that book had a very big impact on how it changed how I thought about everything. Now, the journey across Canada was I've done it twice. The first ride was 8,000 kilometers, which was Victoria, BC or British Columbia to St. John's, Newfoundland, over 104 days. My second ride was Vancouver, British Columbia to Halifax, Nova Scotia, over 91 days, which was just over 6,000 kilometers. Through that, I got hit by two trucks in a car along the Trans-Canada Highway. Ironically, it was a Toyota Corolla that did the most damage, and I broke my wrist and ended up having to ride just under half the country with a broken wrist and a cast. But I made the commitment to finish, so I don't take that lightly. So I just ate it and took it with the pain. And the funny thing was, the doctor asked me if I wanted something for pain because he was like, "That's gonna hurt," and I started laughing. I'm literally riding a bike across Canada to raise awareness for opioid use. So had a chuckle there about it, but yeah, ended up making it through. And the most kilometers I did in one day was 278, which over like 14 hours, which was very, very long day, but very proud of that because that's an exceptionally long distance to be riding. But yeah, so with the film, so like I said, I wanted to film this documentary, and what that was going to look like was I wanted to share my own journey within it. And like I said, that decision to share the journey is a very personal one. And but I felt like I was somewhat ready for it because like I said, it gave me that purpose and meaning. And then cycling across Canada, and what that's like, because that's its own trials and tribulations. And when we're filming it along the way, you get to really see the struggle. But it's also exploring the impacts of the opioid crisis across Canada. So I interviewed people with lived experience, families who lost their loved ones, doctors, addictions counselors, healthcare workers, um, and a couple others. But part of it all doing was going out and doing all the crazy stuff I wish I could do when I was traveling on the bus ride home from the methadone clinic and dreaming of what could be. And so I created a bucket list out of all that. And what that bucket list was I got to hammer a bucket of golf balls off the Rockies, jumped out of an airplane over Montreal, whitewater rafted Northern Ontario, which we lost a camera for, so it's not on footage, unfortunately. But and then just completing the dream of riding across Canada. So what I do now, I do I do a bunch of things now. So I can do a lot of consulting work. So I'm on the board of directors of the Canadian Centre on Substance and Addiction, the policy committee of the Canadian Society of Addiction Medicine. I work on federal, provincial, and local, mental health and addictions and opioid public health strategies. Excuse me. Yeah, and then the CAMH, which is Center for Addiction Mental Health, or Constituency Council, and then my local opioid task force. I'm a motivational speaker. I've been very privileged to travel around North America, speaking, and at one point speaking in front of a couple thousand people in front of the White House in Washington, D.C. at the Fed Up rally. And um, so I do a lot of keynotes at medical conferences, yeah, universities, all the way down to high school assemblies. And I'll get into that a little bit more and kind of when it comes to talking about sharing your journey. but I'm a filmmaker as well. So I did my documentary across Canada, which is on my website, inspiredbyexample.ca. But I also have a series right now that you can find on YouTube called Surviving Addiction. And what it is, it's the different lenses in which people experience addiction through. So my episode's number one, where I tell my lived experience. Episode two is a physician and her lived experience of being a physician, how she manages burnout, how she manages losing patients, how she manages just going through. I mean, working in this field is a meat grinder for everybody. And so then I have a father who lost his daughter to an overdose, a mother whose son's in active fentanyl addiction, um, an addictions counselor in downtown Toronto, a woman with lived experience, and so forth. And what it is the idea and the premise behind it is that it doesn't matter what angle you're facing it from, it's going to touch you in one way or the other. And I wanted to highlight the humanity behind that all. So you can find that on YouTube if you're interested. My day job, though, is I work in the emergency department in Oshawa, Ontario, in the hospital as a peer support specialist. And what that is using my lived experience to be able to connect with people coming in who are in crisis. The value in that is that, like, I've been through that system myself. So when someone sits down, I remove the power dynamic. I'm not a nurse or a doctor, so I'm just a guy that works there. So it gives them eye to eye with me, and when I kind of lead with where I started, and then I can articulate to them what they're going through better than they can articulate to me, they're like, "You get it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I get it. And I promise you this isn't the end." And then now I can build a rapport and start help reframing how they're thinking about what it is they're experiencing, so we can try to start moving forward in the most productive way possible and inform the rest of the crisis team of more complete information so we can better assess their pathway of care. But here's the more important components of the presentation. Going back to the decision to share your story, like I was saying, recovering and sharing your story is a very unique pathway for everybody. It was a very rocky road for me because I went back and forth for the longest time. I'm like, should I share this? Should I not? Is there embarrassment that's going to come with this? What's my family and friends going to think about this when I lay this all out there that they had no idea about? They knew there were some problems, but they didn't know the gravity of them. And it took me a lot of back and forth to decide where that was going to go. And the best thing, if I could go back and tell myself anything with regarding to sharing your journey, and because, like I said, it's deeply personal, there's things you have to factor in when you're making those decisions. And by asking yourself, will I be hurt by sharing my journey? Because when you're kind of rehashing your trauma over and over and over again, you can actually almost wrap your identity around that, because people want to understand what that was for you. But when people see success around getting sharing your journey and then exposing those components of your life, they start to attach their worth to their trauma. And I've seen that happen. I've seen that have very detrimental effects on some people, and that's something you have to keep in the back of your mind, so that you don't want to attach that worth, because it can be very detrimental. Will others be hurt by sharing my journey? So will my family and my friends. I mean, they were inherently a part of my story. And the thought of, I don't want to hurt them, that's not my intent by sharing my journey. But there were things that happened that were very hurtful to me, that transpired over my time. And so it comes down to, like, what do I share about? What don't I share? Is this going to really hurt them? Is it not? Like, and you have to factor in on your, like, immediate close circle of what that might do to them. Will that cause them pain or trauma by sharing those aspects where they were a part of it? Should I prepare my family and friends before sharing? I didn't, but if I could go back, I certainly would have. I would have told. I would spoke with, like, my brother, my mom, and those around me, that look, this is how this felt at this period of time for me. And it was a very rocky road for everybody involved. I'm going to be talking about these things, but it's not anything against you because we're landed in a good place now. We have a great relationship, but I just want to give you the heads up that like I'm not trying to make anybody look bad, but I just want to be honest and forthcoming about the reality of what the experience was for me. And then get based on their reaction, then you can have that conversation and figure out what those boundaries might be that you might be able to share in a way that's going to be not least detrimental to the people who were integrated into your story. And then the question is, how do I know what to share and what I shouldn't share? Again, the way I explain that to people, it's like think about peeling an onion, and then you peel the onion the layer back, and then those tears will start coming, whether you want them to or not. And then once that dries out, those tears will subside, and then you can peel a next layer. And it's going to cause the same thing, and and then so forth. The next layer, the next layer, the next layer, till you kind of got it all out there. And the way I why I put it like that is sharing too much too fast can be very detrimental to, particularly if you're in early recovery, it can be very detrimental to to your own psychology because you're rehashing the deepest moments of your life and some of the darkest things you've ever experienced. And if you throw all of that out before you're ready, it's going to be it's going to bring you it can bring you to a place where it be very detrimental to your own mental health. And so why I encourage to people to do is start with the basics. Start with where those lines are, where like with how deep do I want to go? Like I mean, I went far too fast, far too soon, and particularly sharing the details of finding my dad and then the years leading up to it. Um, that like finding him in a hotel room was that would make me cry every time I was on. It still does make me cry when I'm on stage, but I'm at a point now where I can sit with the thought and not want to run away from it. And but it took me time to get there. Now, and that's what I mean. It takes time to get to the point where you're willing to share those deeply personal and profound experiences of your life, and you have to be very careful and walk that line on a very cautious level, so that you're not damaging yourself or those around you. But now to the kind of tips on sharing the story. What if these are just lessons that I learned that like over 10 years I've spoken in front of thousands and thousands of people, and and like sharing your journey, it's an art. But like the key kind of components of it is the number one thing, if you're going to grab your audience, it's to be relatable and be human. And for instance, like me talking about finding my dad, I mean, anyone can empathize with finding a loved one and what that would be to them, and how hurtful and just how that would could bring you down. But but it's relatable in a sense of that my reaction was like I fell apart. But I'm willing to be open and honest about that, and that's what I find that people tend to appreciate. But the more anyone can relate to what you say, this is true across life and to sharing your story. The more anyone can relate to what you're saying, the more they're going to take away what you have to say. Second of all, the audience must be able to see part of themselves in your story. And that's kind of interchangeable with the being relatable. They like there's components that you share that we all, as human beings, have mutual things that we all experience and that we all go through. And the more that they can see part of themselves and line up the parallels with your journey, then the more they're going to be listening to it because it's applicable to their own. It's no different than my work in the emergency department when I am explaining to them the parallels of my story and theirs. And they're like, oh, and now the rapport is built and now they're open to listening to what I have to say. And it's the same thing regardless if you're doing a speech, if you're doing media or etc. Be relatable and let the audience see a bit of themselves in you. But the kind of core component of sharing your story is you have to know your audience, and then you have to ask yourself before every presentation is what knowledge do I possess that will create benefit for the audience, that will help them learn and then through that is how you create value through your story. So it's so if I'm like doing a keynote at a medical conference, I'm more focused on the medical journey of my addiction. Everything from going through that methadone program, and then crazy enough, I learned so much across Canada talking to thousands of people while making my documentary that I because I didn't go through any treatment. I just got off and then went and did it. But I learned so much that I'm like, if you want longevity in this, you're gonna have to go back and address some things. So I actually went back. I finished this ride, did this movie, then went back and got treatment for it, just so I made sure that I was working through all those things. Um, but so I talk about that, and I talk about the core components on that medical side, and even just finding meaning and stuff like that to help that medical community. I'm in a suit, I'm articulate and precise in how I speak, versus a high school where I'm in a t-shirt, my tattoos are out, and I'll drop an f-bomb in the middle of it just to make sure they're eye to eye because that's how they speak. But then they can see a bit of themselves in me, so now they're going to take away a little bit more just because they're like, oh, this is just a normal dude. And I'm like, yeah. But the another a huge one here within sharing your journey is using non-stigmatizing language. It is critically important that you try to avoid words like addict and junkie and derogatory terms, or the terms that people would perceive negatively that are attached to the worst moments of their life. And the way to kind of do that is always using first person language. It when you hear like I mean, I went through an alcohol phase too there, and whenever I heard the word alcoholic, there was just like an internal sense of shame that came with that, or an addict, and like, or a junkie, and like, and those are just negative pejorative terms that really, it's hurtful. That person might articulate that it's hurtful, but internally that's what they're thinking. So if you can avoid those terminologies as much as humanly possible, you're like, the little things that add up to a lot, and just that one component will prevent people from being detracted from what your story is and what your messaging is. Going back to what I was saying earlier, do not tie your worth to sharing your trauma. Our traumas are inherently part of our journeys, but focus on what the good that came out of all of that. Focus on what the positive things are that you want others to learn by you sharing your journey. And I mean, the trauma is the kind of the setup piece of how you got there, but the rest of it should be the focus, the pull out, the recovery, how you went about your recovery, how you sustained the recovery, and how you were going on to advocate and share your story. But when you're sharing your story, there's a thing called the primacy and recency effect, where people in psychology, where people will remember the last. It's like if you gave somebody three options, they're going to remember that last option first, which is what the most likely outcome is going to be if you're asking them a question. The first thing you say will be the second, and the third would be the last. Always close your with that in mind, always close the message out with a hope or a call to action. You want them to walk away with something, with what you're saying, with a degree of hope, and or thinking like, I can't believe that all happened. I'm like, and if they can do it, then maybe I could do it too. And or a call to action about getting involved in advocacy work, or whatever that call to action is that's important to you. But engaging the media. So I've had the privilege of doing a cross Canada media tour. I went from Winnipeg to Ottawa to Halifax to Toronto for a day, then to Vancouver, and all the way back, all in 10 days, just doing media interview after media interview. And then I got trained up in public relations, and I've done hundreds of media interviews over the years, over the last 10 years at this point. And there were lessons that come out of engaging the media. So one thing is because everyone's kind of sprinkled around the world, who may be listening to this, is it's you in these issues are covered in the media, where regardless of where you are. And if you are hoping to connect and get that media attention, then the best way to do that is find those people who are attached to the writings or sharings of these particular topics with addiction and substance use, and say, hey, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm hoping to, and do it like a press release, and say, hey, if you need anything at all, let me know. I'd be happy to contribute to anything you have going on. But I'll actually kind of stop for a second there. And what the one important thing about engaging the media as far as your own health is concerned is when you engage the media, there is another level of scrutiny that comes with doing so. Because you're doing it to such a broad audience, people who will see that. Again, going back to how does these will this hurt the people around me, but you're also going to have people who know you from your darker times that are gonna talk poorly of you when you are getting the attention and when they do seeing you being successful, because it's just you were looked at as a cautionary tale. And like it or not, some people they make them feel better about themselves by seeing you in a lower place. So if they see you kind of hitting a higher note, it can be that can cause a lot of negative emotions. But at the end of the day, my antidote to that is just focus on what you're doing and block out the rest, and but make sure you're doing it in a healthy way that you're not harming the people around you. But highlighting the aspects, particularly within media, you highlighting the aspects of your journey that make it unique. They don't particularly like working off cliches. And like going back to what I was saying, everybody's recovery and journey is a work of art. It's a work of art that involve their psychology, their interests, their passions, and that's what makes those stories unique. And I think there's a lot of similar stories of how we got into where we got to, but the unique part is how we got out. And focusing on that unique part is really what might help stand out from the crowd. Contrasting the struggle with the triumph, it's going back to what I said. The struggle is what people will pull people in because they can see how they would have reacted in that particular circumstances that may have led you to that place. But they also want to see the triumph of how did you pull yourself out of it? What were the things that they what could they learn that are the things that help you pull you out of it, and then sharing about, and then but painting the ideas of what can be. But yeah, and I mean, with an emphasis, yeah, share the lessons that helped you attain and maintain your recovery. Ultimately, we're trying to get more people involved in recovery and into a state of well-being. And that's we, as Michael said, it's through our stories that we emotionally connect with people, and that emotional connection is what that might resonate with them, and the tools that you share that might help them attain or maintain that recovery. Aim to inspire aim to inspire others with the ideas and possibilities of what can be. Now that's within the triumph. Now it's like some of the stuff I get to do today, we're far beyond the realm of possibility when this was all an idea and I was stealing my food to eat. And when I was sitting on my couch just bleeding from this sign I took to the face. But where everything went for me I mean, it's certainly unique, but the thing is like you want others to you want to show people through your example and the places you never thought you would get to show them of what can be, because there's been many studies of that. If you put a positive outcome, like a successful example in front of somebody of what can be, then I'm in this alone, I don't know what to do, there's no coming back from this, and then you see that somebody has actually done it and you can share those lessons of how you went about it, then the gears start turning. And then with that, like, it's just my whole thing is just like, well, I ask people, if you were amazing and your life were amazing, what would amazing look like to you? And then you can see the gears and excitement start turning, and then those are the ideas and possibilities you want to plant the seeds of when you're talking to people, and particularly in the media. Social media is a very powerful tool. Particularly use specific social medias for strategically for different outcomes. Facebook is more of my personal, But versus say LinkedIn, where LinkedIn is one of those unique social media outlets where you can connect with everybody and all these different positions and all these different organizations, and you can connect with them, and you're not worried about them not accepting it because they're trying to grow their network just as much as you're trying to grow yours. And then once you can kind of get on that radar, then you start kind of putting out there what your messaging is and what it is that you want your audience to take away from. And then once they see that, then they become a little bit more curious about you and what you're doing. And then those will open some doors to create further capacity for more advocacy work. Now, the greatest lessons that that if I learned anything over my life and I could pass on any lesson, what would that be? Going back to the book Man's Search for Meaning, is it taught me again to choose my attitude in any given set of circumstances. So now I'm an optimist now by nature. I was a pessimist growing up, but I'm an optimist now because I get to choose how I get to think about things. And mental health can be a debilitating thing for everybody. I'm not downplaying any complex mental health, but there's my philosophy on it is like you have to live with it. You may as well get something out of it. So where this all kind of played in and me choosing my attitude, all my mental health now is they're tools to me. I look at them as things that they're the reason why how I got to the picture on the right hand side. So, for example, depression. Every time I get to a depression, I hit the low, and then I'll spend maybe a day or two there. But eventually, I'll hit a point where I step back. I'm like, okay, what's stressing you out here? And then I'll jot down a list of 1 to 5 things. Of those 5 things, what's stressing you out the most or the least? Okay, I got that in order. Okay, block out 2 to 5 and just focus entirely on number 1. Like physically block it out and focus on potential ideas that might get you past this. And then same with number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. Next thing you know, you have 5 problems on one page and a page or 2 of potential solutions on the other to potentially move forward with. So what it ends up doing for me is it ends up helping me reorder my life at a higher level. So it creates an adaptability component to my personality. The anxiety component, it makes me think 4 or 5 steps ahead, like a chess game, like that. And I can think strategically to know what to avoid. Addiction taught me, and I think it's taught all of us, if I want something bad enough, I will find a way to make it happen. And that taught me that I have a level of perseverance that is just ingrained in me. ADHD, and then technically fall under the mental health thing, but it is for me. I'm an interest-based learner, and counterintuitively, I can hyper focus on the things I'm interested in. I mean, and that's kind of how I've gotten to some degree of success with not having any experience in film, journalism, public speaking, and all. It's just that I love what I do, so I'm able to hyper focus on it. PTSD is a little bit more challenging at times because it can be a word someone uses in a sentence, or a song comes on the radio when you're out to eat at a restaurant, and it can throw you back for a minute. But the silver lining in that is it helps me keep me grounded in knowing where I come from and knowing without any illusion of what I can go back to. And all of those things. So when you tack up adaptability, strategic thinking, perseverance, hyper focus, and staying grounded and humble within all that, that's been my winning combination to get to all the places that I've gotten to. And if we could put the video up, if that's possible, and just to give you an idea of kind of what this all ended up looking like for me. Do you want me to stop sharing?
I lost the entirety of my 20s to opioid addiction. But if you're going to take anything away from my story, I hope it's you can come back from whatever chaotic situation you're in and turn it into something beautiful.
Okay, so that's my journey essentially and I mean it's 20 years in a nutshell, but that's kind of been the journey for me, and I've been very lucky and privileged and fortunate to learn a lot of lessons through my experiences, and where what brings me fulfillment is passing those lessons on. And so we came up with a few just different discussion questions. I'm not sure if you guys have anything to add in onto it, but yeah. So how does my story differ according to audience? So what I was alluding to earlier was like what I do at a keynote in a medical conference and how I present is very, very different from, say, a high school assembly. When I'm, yeah, like I said, when I'm in like using that example, when I'm in front of a crowd at a university, or I'm in a suit, I'm very well spoken, I'm very articulate, and because that's what's going to resonate with that particular audience, that's what's relatable to them. Versus a high school, when I'm in t-shirt, my tattoos are out, and I'm talking about jumping out of airplanes and making movies and stuff like that, that appeals to them. And but like I said, it's going back to figuring out what it is that you have that's going to appeal, like that would resonate with those particular audiences, and what it is and how you communicate, everything from how you articulate yourself to your body language to how you dress, all plays different factors into how you share your story with the audience. How social media is a useful tool for sharing my recovery. Going back to what I was saying, it's just that you use certain. At least my thing is just I use certain tools use certain outlets for different things, and sharing my recovery journey. I mean, the Facebook is the more personal, just kind of my friends that I've known for a very long time. Instagram is a more public one, and I keep that semi-professional, like a mixture between the personal and then the professional, and then Twitter's like a melting pot of just yeah, places I don't want to go, but I put a kind of more of my professional stuff on there. But LinkedIn is, I find, where you can really get a lot out of it. You can connect with anybody in the world at the top of their levels, and particularly if you're focusing on where you are geographically and who those people are that you can connect with and work with, and and network with, to try to figure out where your guys' mutual goals are, and where you can benefit from each other's work and stories. And I think that I found LinkedIn to be by far my most useful tool within social media. Why is important to use non-stigmatizing language? It's just going back to what I was saying earlier. It's just you don't want to put a negative connotation towards the people listening, particularly if you've been called a junkie before while you were at your lowest. The second you hear that word, even if you are in a good place, it's still going to kick you back to some negative feeling that it's going to give you. And what you want to do is you want to lessen the reasons why anybody wouldn't like lessen the reason why what that would detract people away from you. And the way you do that is you don't use terminology that's going to give people that feeling they had whenever somebody called them that particular name. Even the word addict is one of those things that's probably the most prevalent. It's just they're like it just makes you think of all the negative stuff you went through. At least it does for me and many others, based on what I've spoken about. How can my recovery story inspire and give hope to others? Well, I think people want. I was going back to what I was saying, is that people want to see that you were challenged, and people want to see the reality of what how hard that was for you. But within that, they like it's almost presented as like an underdog story, because you're coming back for you reach rock bottom and you lift yourself up, and then like the way it's perceived is just like that's impressive, versus somebody say, oh, I went to school, I made a bunch of money, and yeah, I'm living my life. like but when people can see that struggle, but you contrast it with, this is what came out of that struggle, and this is what life can be, and these are the possibilities and ideas of what your life can be, or your family member's life might be. That's where you, and then ending on that call to action or that message of hope, because that's what they're going to walk away with ultimately, is that last thing you say to them. And whatever that lesson is, if you put some thought into, if I want them to take away any one thing from all of this, this was what that would be. And that would tend to be your how you close your messages, whether, or ending sentences, whether that's, excuse me, through speaking or media or otherwise. And that's all I got. So I just want to say, one, thank you so much to Michael, Nancy, Pravita, Ashwin, and everyone in the Global Recovery Network, and Anya, the UNODC, for connecting us. And I
Thank you, Chris.
it means so much to me to be invited to do this with you guys, and to everybody out there who is listening. Like, please, you understand the very fact that you're here and listening to this. You guys are heroes for what you're doing, because you're making concerted effort to try to help other people with what you've went through, and you're trying to turn that everything, all the darkest experiences of your life, into something beautiful for others to turn it into something more beautiful. And it is nothing short of heroic. And I please encourage you all to just keep moving forward. It can be a very hard job, particularly when you're giving it all you got and things don't seem to be getting better, and that can kind of weigh on you a bit. But guard against the cynicism that comes with it all, and just keep doing what you're doing. And like I said, you guys are heroes for what you're doing, and I have nothing but the utmost respect for all of you. And thank you so much for having me.
Great. Chris, thank you so much for not only, sharing your very inspiring story, but your willingness to share the lessons that you've learned along the way in terms of how we think about sharing our story. And, I really want to be especially appreciative of your candor in terms of looking back and saying things that you would have done differently. I know for me personally, having kind of shared my story on various stages, that kind of preparing family and friends, you probably couldn't do enough of. So I really want to thank you for doing that. And I want to just follow up, if I can, on a couple questions. And Nancy, you alluded to this in your chat. When you share your story, you open yourself up to other people, kind of many times asking for help, because you might be the first person that they've seen or allowed them to talk about it. And that often can be very challenging, I think, for those of us in positions when you do that. So how do you or others kind of maintain boundaries when you tell your stories in public ways? Because it does open you up to other people kind of asking for help or sharing their stories that can be overwhelming sometimes. So how do you deal with that? How do you try to promote healthy boundaries? Or Nancy or others, if you can think of ways that you do that, because it is kind of a consequence sometimes of opening up, that you give permission to other people to open up as well. And that can be overwhelming at times. So how do you deal with that?
Well, I think we'd love to hear from not only Chris, who's shared so much of his experience with us, but also from our participants, who some of whom are in recovery themselves, and others who may be allies and have shared their story as an ally and may have sensitivities there. I do think it's a matter of knowing that one doesn't have to be an expert with all the answers. The beauty is to inspire people through how you live your life. And I think recovery is about gratitude and humility. And it's okay to say, I don't know what you should do about that, but to answer with hope and supportive language, that because there are a multitude of mental health and addiction experts who can be supportive to people. And we can only keep our corner of the world safe and healthy. So I think sometimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to have all the answers, and everyone's story is unique, and all of us have unique things to offer, but also unique limitations.
Yep.
And that's okay too. So,
Yeah.
are there folks that want to share their thoughts on the question that Michael raised?
Or if people have other comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Now is your time to open this up and share maybe lessons you've learned along the way or reactions to Chris's stories. So, Camilla, you've raised your hand. Do you want to?
Hola, buenos días. Muchísimas gracias, Chris, por compartir tu experiencia. Yo tengo una pregunta, y es que cuando se están compartiendo experiencias, o en algunos casos que yo he visto, lo que hacen es llevar a personas en recuperación, por ejemplo, a colegios, como estrategia preventiva. Y sabemos que eso no tiene un impacto positivo. ¿Cómo hacer para que esto realmente se integre? Porque es que a mí me preocupa mucho que esto se hace, por lo menos en mi país se hace con bastante frecuencia. Y yo sé que es importante contar la historia, pero también cómo hacemos para trazar ese límite y que la persona que está contando la historia entienda los diferentes escenarios en los que es importante contar la historia, así como tú decías, ¿no? Las diferentes audiencias, pero es que a veces yo siento que como que se pierde, se desdibuja el límite cuando estamos pensando en estrategias de prevención. No sé si me expliqué bien.
I know exactly what you're talking about, Camilla, because I spoke on this yesterday, and so I'll jump in and maybe others will have something else to say. But a media microphone gets put in the faces of many people in recovery who are not prepared to share or qualified to speak on certain topics. And so with prevention audiences in particular, there's challenges because I've been in recovery for quite a few years, but in no way do I think I am a prevention expert, even though I have been, with a lot of support, able to remain in recovery and strong recovery. But that doesn't mean I have solutions. And so my little thumbnail guidance is twofold. One, anything below 5 years really is very early recovery. And you need to sometimes cocoon yourself from larger audiences and until you're on some more solid ground. And with prevention audiences, in particular, you have to screen the speaker to see what their ideas are if they're planning to share ideas about prevention programming. There may be wonderful ideas that they have that are unique and powerful and should be scaled up. But when I've been in recovery for a while, and I know one thing, I'm an expert at taking drugs. That's what I have the most expertise in. And just now at my older age years, I'm beginning to feel a balance between how many years I spent using and how many I spent in recovery. But it takes a long time to get there. So just because someone has used drugs and is now in recovery does not make them an expert. That is my message.
Yeah. Thank you, Nancy, for that and for that question. I think I've had similar experience before where I think people who are not familiar with the evidence and the science, particularly around prevention, feel like if they put someone in front of a room at a school assembly and tell their story, that's prevention. And that has been proven not to be true. While it can be very moving and inspiring, it's really not kind of a science-based prevention program. So thank you for raising that. I want to ask Chris or other people. A number of you have raised this idea of some of the challenges it can be to have people who are too early in recovery sharing their story. Chris, you talked about ending on a sense of hope and experience. So what would be your guidance around having people too early in recovery kind of sharing their story? Do they have enough of a recovery journey to end on that message of hope and action that you talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I've come across that from people who've reached out for guidance on them sharing their story, but like, I mean, I did it, and like I said, there's a lot of things I would go back and do differently, but like mine came out just out the gate. I put it out there before I had even done my ride, and and in retrospect, it opened it up to a lot of like, that just gave me a ridiculous amount of anxiety for a sustained amount of time because it was just always in the back of my head of how that's going to be perceived and everything like that. But it's going back to like the onion analogy that I made. It's just you skim the layers off the top. That like if you're gonna start off by just doing the bare bones, and kind of as you get more comfortable with doing that and making sure it's not evoking a very negative reaction inside of you, then you're ready to move on to the next layer. And then slowly, I mean, over now 10 years for me, now I can go down to almost the center of the core of the onion, and I can sit with those thoughts and not be comfortable or like not be uncomfortable with it. But sharing your story too early is I've seen that as a pitfall because then they that again getting attached to the trauma, and then I've seen that result in a relapse.
Yeah.
So
And
because that trauma, yeah.
one of the things that we do in our Recovery Allies course, which is an integral part of the Global Recovery Network, that course is to grow the workforce. And what it does is it provides an evidence-based understanding of what is a substance use disorder, what is recovery, so that we're all operating on the same playing field of science-based approaches and evidence-based approaches to addiction, which we're still learning, and what it is and how to heal it. And so we're all learning together. So that science knowledge is important, and that course, by the way, is available through the ISOP website, and is an important tool if you want to become a recovery support specialist, as Chris is in his ER job.
Yep, great, thank you. We have a couple questions. One from Angie Hamilton, who asks, what would your advice be to governments to reduce barriers to recovery? So you've worked in a number of settings. How do you have any advice for people who are working with governments to kind of reduce barriers to recovery?
It's a very loaded question, and I know Angie actually quite well. Yeah, I mean, it's one, the tokenization of things has to stop. You can't just have a checkbox. You have somebody there as a checkbox, because that could do more damage to the individual, because they're like, "Why am I here?" Like, I'm here because you say on this piece of paper that you have one here, but am I really creating of any value of being here? And I mean, what you do is you embrace the individuals and have a set structure for what their role might entail while being there, so that there's no ambiguity about when they do get there, what it is that is expected, and what it is they may be asked to speak to. I think just having a transparency in that component. But I would actually like to hear, Michael, your perspective on that question.
Sure. So just, for background for people who don't know me, I worked in government most of my life, both at the state level and at the federal level. And I have found that it can be a double-edged sword, quite honestly. While the bulk of my experience has been very positive, in that kind of my own lived experience, I think can be profoundly, it's the same way as sharing your story, can be profoundly moving for people. And it brings a level of credibility to what you're saying, as opposed to just working with numbers and data. So I have generally found it to be a very positive experience. On the other hand, I have also found that there are times where people can discount my experience, and say, well, you're too personally connected to this. I've heard that many times, and maybe you have, and other people have as well. But generally, I have found it to be, an incredibly positive experience, kind of working in government settings. So it's really been kind of a wonderful experience. So thank you for that. But let me ask, there's another question here, which I think is something that people need to consider. Chris, you talked about it. And it says, since storytelling implies being vulnerable, we talked about that, would love to know if Chris ever faced consequences or negative reactions after sharing his story in any setting. And if so, how did you handle it? And love to hear others maybe weigh in on that as well. So have you had negative experiences over the course of your time in telling your story, and how did you handle it?
Yeah, I mean, I've had numerous negative experiences over the years. I mean, I've had where I didn't necessarily give out the warning that this is going to touch on suicide, this is going to touch on, and have bad reactions with individuals in an audience. And then I actually went and made a point to go and talk to them afterwards and apologize, make sure they're doing okay, and then sit down with them and talk about it, and then try to kind of get it back to a good place. I've I've been interrupted quite assertively too, and during presentations, and at times, I mean, I give them the freedom to express themselves and listen to what they have to say. But I'm as diplomatic as humanly possible when it comes to that stuff. And it's like going back to what we were talking about. Everyone has their own journey, and just because my journey went this way and your journey looks this way, it doesn't mean that their one is better or worse than the other. And we shouldn't be pitting things like that. In fact, we're all in this together, if anything else. And so, like, let's have a conversation and we'll move forward together. Yeah, and then just within my personal component of my inner circle in my life, I mean, I put things out there, particularly in the beginning, where I put things out there that put specific people in a negative light within, and they didn't hold up on telling me how much that hurt. And then I felt bad about it, and then I'm like, that wasn't my intention. This was just kind of part of how I was feeling. But in retrospect, I apologize. I should have had that conversation with you before that went out there, and that's my fault. But I will do better in the future.
Great.
And that's all we can do. All we can do is the best is just learn. As none of us are perfect, and we keep learning. We just try to be a little bit better than we were the day before, whether that be in recovery, for sharing your story, or life as a whole.
Right.
And
thank you. We only have about 5 minutes left, and I see our good friend, Dr. Bob DuPont, who is on and has a question. For those of you who don't have the privilege of knowing Dr. DuPont, he is, I think suffice it to say, a legend in our field and a pioneer in our field. We would not be where we are today without his incredible experience and his incredible work. So, Dr. DuPont, I will give you the floor for our last 5 minutes here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, because I don't have a picture. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Michael. In humility and honesty, I can tell you that I was what Michael was calling a leader in the field for 20 years before I had a clue what recovery was. And the question is, what was the light bulb that went off? And the answer was, I also had a private practice that had many people in addiction in it. And my patients taught me. I went to meetings through my patients. What they saw from those meetings, what they saw in the program was so inspiring, not just to them, but to me. And so I encourage people to talk to their doctors and other people about this and not be too frustrated that it takes them a long time, like thinking about me doing it for 20 years. I get very frustrated by the number of people that I work with in leadership positions in addiction treatment who don't understand recovery and don't understand the importance of the meetings and the fellowship that is involved in it, and just dismiss this as a small segment of people somewhere that are not relevant to what is really going on, and it's frustrating to me. A simple statement is recovery is more than not using. People don't understand that. Or here's another one. The person in recovery is a different person than the person was when they were using. They have no way to think about that. It doesn't mean anything to them. They think I've, been converted by some weird religion or something like that. But it's so powerful. That experience is so powerful that we just got to keep educating people. And I think the experts are the hardest people because they're so convinced that they've gone to school and learned all these things, and everybody there around says these things to them, and it's frustrating. But on the other hand, in my now 50 years in the field, the biggest thing that's happened in the field is the emergence of recovery as a dominant force. And it's the people in recovery themselves who are like what you're doing. Michael, I have such respect for you and what Nancy are doing. I'm just in awe of it. And the I don't know what, the generosity, the humility, the tenacity of what you're doing is just inspiring. And so I salute you. But what I want to guess end with is have patience with these idiot experts you deal with. They're good people. They just don't get it. And it'll be there for a long time, and maybe after 20 years, some of them will get it too. But it really is something new in the world and really inspiring.
Great. Thank you, Dr. DuPont. And, I think it's important to understand that we stand on your shoulders. And if we've been able to do anything, it's because of people like you who kind of charted the course. And I really want to thank you for reminding us kind of the power of our stories. And I think that is a great way to end, that we have the opportunity to educate not just people who say they know a lot, but how that can be the medical profession, that can be the law enforcement profession. It's really, I think, a great way to kind of end with kind of understanding the power that our stories bring to affect change. So I want to thank Chris for presenting today and his willingness to kind of share his story. I want to thank Nancy and Ashwin and Pravita and other folks on the team for once again putting this event together. Be on the lookout for other events that we will continue to sponsor. I know that many international organizations are hosting another event on September 30th for International Recovery Month. So we'll make sure that people have access to that information. So once again, thank you to everybody, and have a wonderful recovery month. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye
you
bye.
all. See you next month. Thank you so much, Dr. DuPont, for rounding us out. Thank you all for coming. You'll be hearing from us with a follow-up, and this recording on this seminar will be available on our website shortly. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. I much appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Hi, Chris.